Hey guys, welcome to HipHughes History. We're going to take a look at the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment today and how it applies to schools. There's a number of Supreme Court cases that you're going to want to know about, whether you're an AP government course or whether you're just sitting in school wondering it, or maybe you're one of those cray-cray on the internet people. I don't care. Giddy up for the learning. Let's get her done right now. Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Those are the words, kiddies. And the Supreme Court has been dealing with those words really since the 1940s as that applies to what schools can do and what students have in terms of free expression rights in their schools dealing with religious issues. So we're going to take a look at those court cases, but you would notice that I didn't say anything about church and state because it's not in the amendment. And before we move on, because the Supreme Court's going to point to Jefferson's words, it's Thomas Jefferson in a letter to the Danbury Baptist Association in 1802, where he writes about really religion being a relationship between man and God, and that government really has no business in it. And then he goes on to say that really the true spirit of the Establishment Clause is to build a wall between church and state. So that's where that language comes from the founding father himself, but it's not in the Constitution. So here we go, guys. Let's break it up a little bit and take a look at the important court cases that you're going to want to know about. Dive into these cases, it's important to realize that these are all court cases that are utilizing not just the First Amendment, and again, we're breaking this up into the Establishment Clause, respecting the establishment of religion, and the Free Exercise Clause, and the free exercise thereof. So there's kind of two different variables that are going into the pot here, but the other important variable is going to be the 14th Amendment, no state shall deny its citizens life, liberty, or due process. That's the kind of the hook that brings in the states into this fold, because without the 14th Amendment, it would purely be a federal viewpoint. We'd only be looking at actions taken by the United States federal government, but because of the 14th Amendment, the court's going to be selectively incorporating kind of these issues with the 14th Amendment under the umbrella of the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause. That's a lot of words there, kiddies. So let's take a look at some court cases. The first court case is actually not purely religion, but in 1943, we have West Virginia Board of Education versus Barnette, and this really is the free exercise portion of that language when it's talking about whether students have the right not to be coerced into saying the Pledge of Allegiance or putting their hand over their heart or saluting. So while not religious in nature purely, it was brought forth by Jehovah's Witnesses who are using this free exercise clause argument to say, you can't make us do this. It's violating my free exercise of my religion. And the court agrees, and that's why it's a voluntary kind of thing. So if your school is telling you, you have to say it, I don't want to get you in trouble, Johnny, but you wouldn't get in trouble at the end of the day because the Constitution is on your side. Now, the first selective incorporation case when it comes to the Establishment Clause, and you want to write this one down, this is a big one, is going to be Everson Board of Education versus Ewing Township, 1947. And this is a court case that deals with New Jersey that is using the money, tax money that's coming in, to basically use for transportation to private schools. And the taxpayers are saying, well, whoa, wait a minute. You're taking my money. This is government money, and you're spending it on this kind of religious endeavor. That's Establishment Clause. And while the court doesn't agree, the court's going to uphold this law. They're going to say that, you know, the purpose of the law has nothing to do with religion. It's just kind of a consequence of the law. They are in agreement that there is a wall between church and state. It's just that the wall doesn't cover this one activity. But that's going to change quite quickly. It's going to change in 1948, where we have MCCOLUM versus Board of Education. And MCCOLUM is the first instance where the court's going to say, yeah, you kind of hit the wall there, baby. And what we have is basically Illinois, which is allowing in their public schools for religious people to come in during the day and basically to provide religious instruction. So while the state's not providing it, they're inviting them in, they're giving them the class space, and the students are receiving this instruction. And the court says that violates the Establishment Clause. There's just too much endorsement of religion when you go to a specific religious group and you invite them into this public sphere. So they're going to knock that down. And then in 1952 in New York City, there's a Zorach versus Clauson, where New York kind of got around that by saying, well, we'll just have kind of a release day. So if you have a special religious holiday, we'll give you an exemption. They can take attendance as you leave the building and go to your church or synagogue or whatever it might be. And in that court case, using this kind of, test of whether or not the government's endorsing religion establishment clause, the court says, no, that's okay. So all of these court cases are kind of trying to find that height of where that wall between church and state is. And you can see that it's kind of going up and down as we go through these different court cases. But here's the big one, and this is the one that upsets a lot of people. It's probably the most famous court case. That means it's going to be on the test, children. And that's ENGLE versus VITALE, 1962. Write it down. If you're cheating, write it on your hand. Do whatever kids do. But this is the big guy. And it's actually New York, and there's 10 families that have come together that are protesting what is basically a state-sponsored prayer in New York, where New York would write a supposedly non-denominational prayer that would say something to the effect of, our Heavenly Father bless us, or something that is kind of not very religious specific, but it's specific enough that the court's going to knock it down. The court's going to say that, this is coercion, that you're basically saying that we're going to tell you when to pray and what to say, and you have to do it. Or at least you're being made that you have to feel you have to do it. I mean, if you're 5 years old, you're not going to be like, I ain't saying the prayer, man. Where's my lawyer? So the court says that's going to kind of violate that wall. It's just too much. The school having, devotional religious exercises, that's not the place. That's the place for, the private sphere, not the public sphere. Now, the last case in the 1960s before we hit a big one, we're going to get to that in a second, is going to be Everson versus Arkansas. And what Arkansas basically did is they passed a law which forbade the teaching of evolution. I ain't going to teach you evolution anymore. Ugh. And there's basically people going, that's, a religious decision. You're not making your curriculum guidelines based on science and education. You're basically saying, this is my religious point of view, and we have enough people in the state democratically who believe in it, so we want you to teach that way. The court says that's an endorsement of a religious belief. That's not secular. That's not non-denominational. You have a purpose here, and we ain't going to let you do it. So they get to teach about the monkeys. So there you go, guys. Those are the court cases that are before the Lemon test. And right about now, you're like, Mr. Hughes, what's the Lemon test? I'm going to tell you.
Come here and learn a lesson from the lovely lemon tree. My son, it's most...
So if you're cheating, it's Lemon versus KURTZMAN, 1971. And this is the court case that's going to create the famous Lemon test that has nothing to do with used automobiles, but it is used to test whether or not a state action is violating that wall between church and state. So basically we have Rhode Island and Pennsylvania that have crafted a school system where Rhode Island is paying private school teachers, religious instructors directly out of their state funds, and Pennsylvania is reimbursing private schools for teacher salaries, transportation costs, textbooks, things like that. And basically we're testing whether or not this violates, the Establishment Clause. Have Pennsylvania and Rhode Island gone too far? The court basically says, yes, you have gone too far. But before I tell you why you went too far, let's set up some guidelines so we have something to use in the future, so we don't have to keep having a million court cases. So they say, this is what we're going to do in the future. If we have some kind of, school rule or state law, we're going to say, number one, is the purpose of this legislative act secular? If they're trying to pass a law that's trying to say, Christianity is the best or Buddhism is the baby, that makes no sense. That's not secular. So number one, is it secular? And they say Pennsylvania and Rhode Island, it was a secular law. It wasn't trying to, really do anything for these religious institutions other than reimburse them with state money. And then number two, it says, is this legislative act either inhibiting or advancing religion? And they say, we're not going to get into this, but in the future, we're going to look at that. If we can tell that you're trying to advance Judaism or you're trying to say, Buddhists beware, you're not going to be able to do that. But this is the one that Pennsylvania and Rhode Island violated that we're going to put in the Lemon test. It's excessive entanglement. We don't want the state, this is what the court says, we don't want the state kind of having its hands all inside the church working with each other. because it's just too political and there's just too much kind of history in the United States that we don't want to develop into that type of society. So yes, it does violate that. But that's the Lemon test. Is it secular, advance, or inhibit? Is there excessive entanglement? And now there's a few court cases we're going to look at really quick until we get to the 1990s. And the first one is a free exercise clause case, and this is Wisconsin versus Yoder. This is 1972, and this has to do with the Amish that are saying it's part of our religious belief that we don't think that children should have to go to school after 8th grade. We want to put them to work. We want to keep them home. And the state says, whoa, we have a very legitimate state purpose here. We need an educated citizenry. You got to go to school. And the court says, no, this is where it really gets kind of, controversial. But at the end of the day, this is the most important thing to these people is their religion, and it's a religious belief. It's their free exercise. And we're not going to take away their free exercise of their religion. So if you're Amish, it's 8th grade, you don't got to go anymore. Stone versus Graham, Kentucky, 1980. And what they did in Kentucky is they passed a law putting up the 10 Commandments in all the schools. And there's a number of students, a number of families who are offended by this and go to the court and say, you can't do that. And the district is saying, look, it's just an historical document. We're just putting this up as part of our history, the 10 Commandments and kind of where our civilization came from. And what the court says is, that's not going to fly. You're trying to advance Christianity. You're not putting up, all the other religious documents. You chose that one because you believe that one's the best and you want all the kids to know about it. It's not a curricular thing. It's a religious thing. The 10 Commandments are not supposed to be posted in public schools. We have Wallace versus Jaffree in 1985. Basically, Alabama is kind of trying to get around ENGLE. They want school prayer real bad. So the court was allowing moments of meditation. If someone passed away, we have moments of silence, that kind of thing was okay. What Alabama did was they passed a legislative act that said we're going to add meditation, moment of silence, or prayer. They want prayer. They want it in there. And the court says, we know what you're trying to do. You're trying to get prayer in there. And prayer is just too religious. It's too controversial. It goes, over that wall. We don't want it to. So we're going to knock that down. And Alabama's law was struck down. And then in 1987, we have a court case, which is Edwards versus Aguillard. And this is Louisiana, trying to get around Epperson. If you remember Epperson, I was like, you can't teach evolution. Well, the court said, yeah, you're going to teach evolution. So what Louisiana did is said, well, okay, then if you're going to teach evolution, you're going to teach creationism. And they passed the Creationism Act, which said you had to teach creationism as a viable option if you were going to teach evolution, which we disagree with. And the court said, again, this is not a secular law. This is a religious law. And you're trying to advance a certain religious concept. You're not allowed to do that, Louisiana. So it's a no-go. Now, we're going to get into the 1990s, and then we're going to be done. So in 1990, we get a huge court case. It's called Board of Education of Westside Community School versus Mergens. And what was going on here was the students came together and they decided that they wanted to have a religious club. They wanted a Bible club. So they started their Bible club. Somebody complained, and we're going to the court, baby. Can students have religious clubs, political clubs even? And what the court says is yes, with a caveat, with a little exclamation point, not an exclamation, an asterisk. And here are the rules, basically. Number one, it has to be student-led. This can't be a faculty endeavor. The students have to come together on their own. This is free exercise clause. If the school administration and the teachers are putting it together, it's going to violate the establishment clause. This is a really great court case because it's showing the balance between the establishment clause and the free exercise clause. And number two, it says, you can't pay teachers to be there. They have to be there just in a custodial role. They're really not even supposed to participate. They're supposed to kind of watch. And you can't be bringing all religious people in either. But if students want it, and it's not during school hours, and nobody's getting paid to do it, students have that right. But that means if you have a right to start the Bible club, then you have to allow all the other clubs. And you can't start picking and choosing out of popularity, because then we get into advancing and inhibiting religion. So that's Westside. That still stands today. That's why there's a lot of schools that have religious clubs. Now, 1992, Lee versus WEISMAN. Can schools have rabbis or Christian pastors come to graduation and give speeches, even if they're under guidelines. And the court says, no, you can't do that. Because by doing that, even if it's really popular, everybody wants the favorite pastor of the local Bible school to come in and give a big speech. What you're doing is you're coercing people. You're having people that don't want to hear that have to hear that. And in a sense, you are picking that religion. So it's advancing that religion, and therefore you're not allowed to do that. The next one is going to be Santa Fe Independent School District versus Doe. This is year 2000, and this is Texas, baby. And what in Texas they like is they like their football and they like God. And they combine those by having student-led prayer in most school districts. And this is back in the late 1990s, where they would basically have an election where they would nominate somebody that would be the person with the chosen religious prayer. And then they'd be given the mic, and everybody would be led in that prayer. And basically what the court says is, you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to do that because, number one, you're politicizing religion. You're having people vote on religion. So does that mean we only get to hear the majority religion? We only get to advance that prayer? What about the religion that came in fifth? Oh, no one's ever going to hear that one. And since the school owns the audio system and they're handing the mic, they're in a sense endorsing. It's not secular. They're advancing a certain religious idea. And to protect the coercion effect from that minority, we're going to knock that down. You're not allowed to do that. The last court case is in 2002. We have Zelman versus Simmons-Harris, and this has to do with Cleveland. Cleveland came up with a plan to help their students, and in that plan, they could either receive free extra help after school, they would be able to apply to go to a magnet school, or they'd be given money, a voucher. And those vouchers, of course, are paid with taxpayer dollars, and 97% of those vouchers were being used for kids to go to parochial schools, religious schools. So the taxpayers near Cleveland are saying, we don't want to pay for someone to go to, Bible camp. That's, you using my money. You're endorsing religion. This is establishment of religion. And the court says, would you just stop it? That's not true. This is just free choice. If they choose to go and use that voucher at that place, they can go there. If you want to start the school of, hillbilly temple sciences and get people to go to your school with the voucher, then good for you. But we're not advancing it. We're not inhibiting anybody from doing that. And we're certainly not, endorsing anything. So that's where that stands. We can have vouchers going to private schools. And now we're going to wrap it up. Wrap it up. Certainly, there's a lot of other controversial things that the court really hasn't come down on yet. Like right now, if you want to wear religious symbols, some schools try to classify that under the kind of gang concept and say you're not allowed to do that. The lower courts have ruled you have a right if you want to bring rosary beads, or you want to wear a big pent or whatever. If it doesn't disturb instruction, and they're not picking and choosing, you should be allowed to do that. When it comes to religious holidays, the court's been pretty clear on that from the lower court standpoint, that you're not allowed to pick the Christmas tree over the, the Kwanzaa tree. Is there a Kwanzaa tree? But right now, schools aren't really able to do that because it's an endorsement, it's an advancement. Go back to the Lemon test. Now, I'm done. So what do you think? Now's the time for you to go down and type your opinions down below, because we love comments. Keep it civil, keep it nice, because that's the American way to do things. I'm Johnny Cash. So guys, giddy up for the learning. If you haven't subscribed to HipHughes History, you can do that by clicking the big red button there. There's like a million videos. There's like a whole bunch. Or go to www.hiphughes.com where they're all organized, which I'm not very good at. So there you go, guys. We'll see you next time that you press my buttons. And always remember, I say it every time, where attention goes, energy flows.